would like to come in. It looks like a lot of people are here. I'm going to invite our panelists and our team up for this section. And my name is Bruce Hecht. I'm really pleased to be here with Ravinder, who's hosting us. Srinivas, who's also our host, sends his regards. He had another occasion come up, but he was really excited about this event. And Drew, did you want to join us? I think your presentation and your panel is coming. Yeah, but what I would say, yeah, your next one. But I would say, this is great. It comes to the front because I was going to say everyone should venture to bring your questions. And so what we're going to do now in this session, which is our chance for discussion, to follow up on some of what you've heard today, to follow up on the themes of Sensors in Spotlight. Some of the things that we heard so far this morning had to do with what are sensors? How are they being used? What kinds of opportunities is this creating? How is this changing both how things are done in industries? Also some of the challenges. So what happens when we put technology out in the world? What does that mean for the humans that are both using the technologies and building the technologies? So this session now is an opportunity for us to have some conversation. Part of my role as moderator really is to get questions up in the air. So hopefully it's like a game of volleyball and we keep the ball moving. But I really wanted to invite also participation from everyone that's here. And Drew reminded me, so Drew will be speaking this afternoon, that he's a polymer chemist or chemist? Chemical engineer. Chemical engineer. So first question, I guess, is we'll just do a round, maybe try to get to know each other. Who here is a chemist or a chemical engineer? If you are, you should definitely raise. Okay. And I'll say, so my field's in electrical engineering, so electrical engineers, computer scientists. We know there's pilots in aerospace and aero engineers, a few that are here. Okay, who's in a different field of engineering? What are your fields? Shout them out, maybe. Mechanical? Bioengineering. Dan? Physics? Oh, biomedical. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, if you want to say your names too, where you're from. Okay, so, and in other fields of science, we're in the Interdisciplinary Science Engineering Center. Scientists in the room, applied science. And okay, how about people from other fields? Well, business, involved in business, entrepreneurship, technologies, yes. And what others? What am I missing? I know there's more. Okay, and then we were just talking earlier maybe about a local or who's from out of town. So if you're local, maybe just give us a check-in. Yeah, and those who've come from away. I always say sometimes I come from the longest, but this week it's only been from Connecticut. So so going back and forth between Boston and Connecticut. Okay, well with that, I was going to invite Amy, since you're joining us and you haven't yet had a chance to say, if you maybe want to give us a short version to give us a flavor about your career and your connection with sensors and transducers, and a little bit about what you've done and what you're doing now.
Sure, thank you. My name's Amy Duwel, and I began in MEMS just after my PhD. So I was a PhD student at MIT where I met Steve, one of our audience members. And Steve, both Steves, all the Steves. And at that time, I was studying superconductors in the late 90s. And in the 2000s, MEMS, microelectromechanical systems, were an emerging, exciting technology, lots of startups and lots of exciting research happening. So I jumped right in. All of my friends were doing it, and I just thought it seemed so exciting. And I went to Draper, which is a local not-for-profit in Cambridge, where I spent most of my career doing early stage research and development for government sponsors on more physical sensors. Most of my career was on gyros, accelerometers, light sensors, different types of physical sensors. And then later in my career at Draper, I did management. I got kind of jealous. I thought all of my friends doing bio were having much more impact in their careers. Because as MEMS matured, the need for some of the R&D at places like Draper became very focused in certain areas and not as broad as it was in the early part of my career. So I got interested in bio, but having not trained in bio, my biggest way that I could contribute was actually to be part of a management team. So I did that for a while at Draper, and then eventually decided that I needed to go back to science, and I needed to contribute to a new area of science that I had newfound passion for, which of course was in medical and diagnostics applications. And so now I'm at a company where I'm doing a little of both. I'm doing an employee-owned company named STR, and we still do a lot of research and development. I'm working on things ranging from quantum communication systems to new opportunities in sleep medicine. And so I'm kind of trying to push in directions that I have some passion for and can leverage the sensors background, but maybe more as an integrator at this point in my career. I also, on my, I guess on my title here, I have listed as Transducers Research Foundation. This is a small organization that helps conferences like today's conference exist. And something that I didn't learn until later in my career was that conferences basically have a cash flow problem. You can pay for the registration, but they need to book the room and the hotel and the caterer like years before. And so organizations like IEEE and TRF exist to support the community of scientists and researchers who need to gather and share their ideas by making conferences happen. And so that's something I do on the side. Thank you.
Oh, great. Thanks, Amy. I was wondering if we could start maybe with what do you see as opportunities? And you mentioned a lot of really exciting technologies, but now that you mentioned conferences, IEEE has over 2,000 major conferences, plus others that are starting up all over the world. And one question has to do with, can we take advantage of our own kinds of technologies that we're building? So I don't know if you have a wish list that you'd like to see in the conference space, or if you want to just dive right into what you see as how do you find really exciting opportunities in your work?
Well, should I share?
And you can, yeah,
okay.
please.
I just got to speak, so let me share the question with my colleagues. So the wish list of what conferences should cover.
Well, and this actually is part of, you picked up on my ideas.
Yeah.
Like, really, we can ask each other. So from what you heard, maybe to Sasha, what was something interesting that he presented that you want to hear more about?
So I think this notion of multidisciplinary fields and combining kind of passions from different areas, that really resonates with me as well. And I think conferences is sort of a great place to kind of bring the community of people together that have very different backgrounds, but by putting them in a room together, I find that sometimes the greatest ideas kind of arise when you bring people from different disciplines together. So I've certainly seen that happen in my career, and it's one of the things that really excites me about the work that we do. So, one of the things every year AFFOA hosts like an annual membership summit. Or actually, I'll put a plug for that now. September 23rd and 24th, and in fact, finding a place is not trivial. Last year we had the great luck of doing it at Fenway Stadium. We were able to rent the room at the very top of the stadium. It was amazing. And this year it's like 10 times more expensive. We can't, afford it, so we're going to be going out to Gillette Stadium this year, a little further out. But you're absolutely right. Planning for that ahead of time is always a challenge. So I actually would love to learn more about how your organization supports those needs. But what we do is we bring together at these conferences folks from all sorts of different fields, from material science to biology and medicine, the Department of Defense, and all in one room to share what's going on in the common thread of advanced functional fabrics. And as you saw probably in the presentation, there's maybe a non-obvious way that fabrics kind of connect so many different disciplines. If you're doing on-body sensing, someone, a material science nerd like myself, doesn't know the biology. I need a biologist to tell me, here's the physiology of what you actually are trying to measure. Here's what, the actual signal and how you decouple that from the noise. You need electrical engineers and signal processing people to actually be on the team. So I find that as we get to more and more complex products and ones that have more and more impact, you kind of need to bring in a wider group of experts. into the field. So that's personally also really what excites me, is just learning from all these different people. I know that I have my own expertise to contribute, but then being able to learn from so many other people and do something great where the sum of the parts is sort of more than, you know, linear. And I think conferences are a great way to kind of catalyze those discussions.
I was just camp on to that. Great, what you just said, Sasha. Looking at the young people out here, and now that I'm deep into my career, I would encourage you to stay engaged with industry and attend these conferences throughout your career, not just while you're in school, because you know, we just touched on is that, you know, I lead innovation teams, and I'm encouraging these teams to go out to conferences, go out to industry, meet new people, exchange new ideas. There's a lot of innovation is not about inventing new forms of physics. It's about, oh, you get an idea that sparked from something else, some other discipline that you've never heard about before, like fabrics. I had no idea about fabrics until I just heard his talk. But wow, the juices are flowing in my brain now, and how can I apply this technology to solve some hard problems in my industry? So that's just kind of a general, you know, guidance, if I may share, is that stay engaged and attend these conferences when you can, when you have that opportunity.
I just want to add to that, something you said really resonated with me. I think one of the biggest things that I learned from my career of leaving, I did my PhD at MIT and postdoc at MIT, and MIT is all about developing technology, and a lot of times you're not quite sure as a student, as a graduate student, or as a postdoc, kind of what exactly is the big problem that this new technology can solve. And there's this vague understanding that, hey, you know, there's going to be a connection, but a lot of times when you're doing the discovery process, you're not necessarily motivated by a very specific problem, maybe more general. But I found as we transitioned to AFFOA and as we started to learn more about industry problems and Department of Defense problems, actually like having a deep understanding of the big real problems drives innovation in ways that are so much, I don't know, in some sense deeper than innovating outside of that knowledge. And I would just encourage you, if you're a student, if you're a postdoc, to really try to do that customer discovery with industry and with the users of the eventual users of the technology that you would be developing. I've seen too much technology development, just it goes somewhere, there's an amazing paper, and of course the currency of academia is always the paper, you know, the science, the nature paper, and then it's, oh my God, I'm done, you know, doesn't get any better than that. But I would always encourage you to say, well, okay, that's great. What problem can I solve with it? And maybe even start with the problem. Start with the curiosity about learning these different problems. Like, for example, today, even seeing the problems on the detection of the angle. I mean, that can drive so much technology development on sensor side, but you have to know about these problems. So I guess my call to action to students and early career individuals, like, try to really be very serious about understanding specific problems and have that, if you can, drive your research agenda.
Sasha, I want to pick up on maybe two themes. This one about deployment, you know, problems and solutions, but also you said something earlier that I wanted to pick up about Fenway Park, because what it reminded me was an event that I organized with John Werner. We do partnerships between IEEE and the local area, and John one year organized to do the conference, not in the conference room, but actually in the stands of Fenway Park. So while they were, you know, setting up the park and doing practice, we would move from one part of the stand to another. And there was an optometrist with the team who works with the players. And what he was doing was adding patterns onto the baseball so that when the players were, you know, working to focus to make better contact with the bat, how was that happening? And they were using vision systems and other kinds of sensors, but it was a combination between what the technology could do, but also how is the player interacting, you know, with that device. And so it made me think, if you get outside of the house, you know, what you can learn. But that last part, then I think maybe could be something we could pick up on. So what are some stories of deployment, especially when it's a new technology, which you also were sort of alluding to, as we can, as scientists and engineers, build the technology. We're sometimes prompted about a possible use, but then once we've gotten partway down the road, what are actual ways that we then find the real use cases, and how do we partner up to do that? So I'm wondering if you might have stories here on the panel. We could hear one from what you might think. Or Amy, if you wanted to jump in, looked like maybe you were sparking an idea.
Yeah, I think stories of deployment, it's actually in my MEMS area. It's a long process sometimes. It's a lot longer than you think. And I'm going to tell you a story that isn't my deployment. It's just something that I recently came across. I'm working on a proposal right now in sleep medicine, and I assumed that because people who I know had been working on wearable, continuous biomedical sensors for so many years, I feel like I've got colleagues and I've heard about this for more than a decade. I assumed that there were going to be so many things that my proposal could use, and we could just go buy them and it would be perfect. And I come to find, despite, and I don't know why I just assumed the field was so mature, because I've read so many papers, so many great papers on this. But today, there's only one company selling a commercially available cortisol sensor that's continuous. And I don't know, with all the Fitbits and the smartwatches, I thought this was a no-brainer. There was obvious, and I've read all these papers, one company, and they only have an investigational approval, so it's not something you can buy. You can use it for research, and I might, but it's crazy expensive because they just got it going. So cortisol sensors, testosterone sensors. Today, you know, people are still understanding testosterone, and there's been fads and, you know, how you need to replace hormones for men and women at different ages, and they're still learning about this. Well, one of the things that would help medicine learn about your personal needs is if they could sense it without taking blood every 15 minutes, which is how often you need to measure something like testosterone in order to capture the rhythms that happen, because it's released as a part of your activity and as a part of your circadian cycle. So on the bio side, I was shocked that deployment hasn't really happened, despite the fact that I've been reading fabulous papers for 15 years. And so there's a long process. And I think the deployment story in that space might be partly the challenges of regulatory, but I think some of it is also the challenges of starting new commercial technologies, you know, in this world. Like, we need to have investments, and we need to have the opportunity to mature our products. And so that pathway is really just a very long pathway. And you know, the end users, you need to deeply understand the end users. The end users are hungry for this technology, but have all but given up. You know, they put in a catheter. If they need to know, they just put in a catheter and they go measure your blood every 15 minutes. So I think the deployment path in sensors is inevitably difficult. It could be improved if we have more platform capabilities. Like, I feel like the fiber-based is a new platform. So new platforms that are vetted can help, just in the same way that semiconductor, you know, standardization helped develop so many new circuits. So I think I'd be excited to see improvement, not just in specific applications, but in platform technologies that can make that timeline shorter. So
I want to pick up on that, but Steve's got a comment.
Well, yeah, this is a little out of more left field. Spent a career in flight simulators and working with humans, and really my interest is the human and technological interface, and the I call it psychotechnical interface. And one of the projects that we were working on is we developed a new type of sensing. It was vision-based that would watch pilots' fingers on the cockpit. And we talked about, you know, discovery with your customer and having conversations with your customer. And customers can have that conversation and tell you their explicit needs. But I encourage you to take a step further and see if you can ferret out their implicit needs, things that they need that they can't necessarily verbalize or think to tell you. And what we learned is that we worked with our direct customer who knew what we were doing. And yes, they verified that these sensors could watch their fingers, And these were instructor pilots, watch their fingers, and yes, I can do these functions in the cockpit by the system watching our fingers. Everything looked great. And then we took it to the next tier where we put this device in front of their students who didn't know the gig. They just sat down and started training and discovered a whole new set of challenges. And it was amazing, you know, the psychology there, that the instructors who knew what we were trying to do could make the system work, but the students who didn't know what we were trying to do, we had challenges with the system. So really deep dive and spend time, you know, with the customers and with the deployment, and really see the second order and the third order effects to really understand the total impact of what you're trying to do.
Yeah, to that point, it brings me back to a visit I had to Milliken, huge textile company. They have this huge innovation center, and of course everyone knows this quote, but Henry Ford, if I would have asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So, you know, in many cases, you have a revolutionary technology. The market doesn't yet know that it needs it, and you have to, you know, really get out there. And I guess what I would like to add is kind of the space for entrepreneurs to take that risk. A lot of times what we've found is, man, it's obvious that there's a product market fit here. Like, we have this demonstration, we're showing that it works, the technology works, we have a manufacturing process for it, but yet who's going to take it to market? And sometimes it doesn't fit with the existing models of the existing businesses. And we found that a lot, actually, and we still have that. We're sitting right now on prototypes and on what we believe are products that would have a product market fit, but what's lacking is essentially a champion to make it happen, because the companies that were involved, like I showed the example of the color changing fabric. Well, so who should take that to market? Should it be the weaver, Inman Mills? They weave fabrics, that's their business model. They have no business in electronics, they've got no business in software, they've got no business in assembly, their business is weaving fabric. Okay, the cut and sew, they do cut and sew, they've got no business in fabric. Software people do software. But here you're creating a product that has all the above, you know, and so this is really an opportunity for someone to start a company and basically build that supply chain and develop those companies to learn new things, and it's completely not trivial in these new fields. And as Amy said, it takes many, many years, and it requires, especially if we're talking about kind of the so-called tough tech, where it's not just software. It's even harder to raise money in this space because the return is going to come a lot later than what you have with a software company. But those are not reasons to be deterred. Those are, I think, opportunities. Just if you have that passion inside of you to try to make something of it, like really, you know, try to cultivate that passion and surround yourself with people that can help you. And don't think just because that product is not there that there's no need for it. A lot of times it's not there because it hasn't been championed fully by a champion.
Sasha, I want to amplify what you're saying, I think, because that's maybe a call to action, you know, for today, for the Sensors in Spotlight and for the participants. You know, what are the things that people are seeing? I was thinking, Amy, when you were speaking about the sensing, I was last year at the IEEE's Engineering Medicine Biology Conference, and one of the topics was about sweat sensors. So like you said, you don't want to have invasive measuring from, you know, taking a sample of the blood, but if only it was already coming out of the body and you could do it. But the challenge, I think, and we were talking about this earlier, is when you were creating new technology, there's both a supply and a demand. So I think AFFOA, Sasha, where you're at, and Yvonne Howe spoken about this, you know, the state Secretary of Economic Development. We need that connection between science and industry, between manufacturing and building things. And to build things, we gotta have demand of where it's gonna be used. So it's a little bit of a cycle question. And that maybe is a call to this audience. I have some more questions. I know there's more, so we're gonna continue it, but maybe there's an opportunity if people, I know there were some questions that people wanted to ask, or also if this is prompting an idea in your area, what would you like to know more about? So Roger's got his hand up, and I've got one, so I'll give the floor first to Roger. Roger's part of our team. Roger?
Thank you. So Sasha, since I tend to know you more than the others because I'm the guy that invited you to come to this thing, and I've been to AFFOA numerous times. The question continually comes up for me, because I'm a commercialization guy. What are the major barriers that you see from a functional fabric point of view, from it not being what I call, at least, baseball terms, a double. We're not talking about over the green monster here. We're talking about singles and doubles. Where have there been the major success stories of people that have used functional fabrics and the work that you and your team and AFFOA have put together to bring out a product that's in the market and is making money for a company? Where are they? Where can I buy one?
Thanks, that's, yeah. I thought you were going to give me a softball here. No, well, I'll give you one great example. I mentioned the project call in my talk. In 2016, when we first launched AFFOA, we thought, we got to do something really exciting, and let's launch a project call. We're going to put in seed investments of $1 million per project, but we really want a revolutionary idea, and we want to see a path to commercialization. And so 6 teams that I showed presented a concept, and all of them, by the way, have made significant progress. But one of the teams, it was a founder. His name was Jordan. He lived at the time, Jordan Schindler. He lived in Oregon at the time. He had this concept of basically, what if I could, he struggled with acne, and his whole thing was like, I'm tired of putting cream all the time, cream. So he had this notion of, could a fabric that I'm wearing be also a medical delivery system? And so he was exploring this hypothesis, and he came to us with an idea that he thought would have a need in the market, that with pain-relieving cream, like things like Bengay and others. And his hypothesis was that what if I could introduce this pain-relieving medication into a thread and make products like knee braces or elbow braces for pain relief? And he had some investors lined up. His investors said, hey, great idea, like go to Asia, they'll make this for you. And of course, AFFOA was and is about helping US manufacturing become stronger. And so we brought him in, we connected him with a manufacturing solutions center in North Carolina. He moved to North Carolina, he set up shop there, and he had by that time a demonstration that the physics was possible, because AFFOA, we don't fund fundamental discovery research. You have to show that your concept has been shown in the lab, and now you need help with scale up and transitioning into manufacturing. So we seeded that investment. It was 2 people at the time. It was Jordan and his partner. Fast forward 2021, a company called New Fabrics. They joined the list of the top 50 fastest growing companies in North Carolina and top 500 growing companies in the US. And last year, they were acquired and had an exit, and Jordan started a new company called Clothing 2.0, where he's looking at other pharmaceuticals that go into textiles, for everything from bands for pregnancy that reduces stretch marks to psoriasis relief with fabric. So it's a platform for delivery of medication through a fabric. But today you can go into CVS and Walmart and you can buy these New Fabrics products that, listen to Jordan say, if it wasn't for AFFOA, we would not be doing that in the US today. So that's kind of one example of taking it all the way from, I can demonstrate this technology, to actually starting a company and manufacturing. And the supply chain is all within 1 hour drive of Conover, North Carolina. So it's a full US supply chain.
So when I go to Walmart, when I go to Walgreens, what do I look for? What's that product at Walgreens called?
I believe it's still marketed under New Fabrics, NUFABRX, I believe.
Oh, this is great. Thank you,
Fabrics.
Sasha. Thank you, Roger. Okay, Ravinder, passing the microphone to Scarlett.
Thank you. While we're talking about platform technologies, Amy, you mentioned something like that for some sort of medical device and monitoring. Could you tell us a little bit about what that might look like for you, some sort of instrumentation port for humans? And actually, Steve, depending on what Amy comes up with, I'm curious if you'll have thoughts about how this could be applied in aviation or other high human factor settings.
Sure. So even in the context of sweat sensing, so for biomedical, there's motion sensors, heart rate sensors. There's a lot of different modes. But in the mode where you're trying to detect some sort of protein or molecule in someone's body, one of the big hot trends is sweat or interstitial, where they'll use microneedles to just get right under your skin, but not deep enough to hurt you because your nerve endings don't go up into that final layer. But even there, those sensors tend to be either they have to be bespoke, where you have exactly, you know what you want to sense, and your entire molecular recognition to electrical or light transduction line is very customized towards a single molecule. And, you know, there are some generic platforms that might be like enzymatic sensing and whatever, but I think that if we were able to develop more platform technologies in that space where you would, you know, maybe you have an electronic platform that can do the transduction to the electrical domain, but your molecular recognition and transduction capability wouldn't have to be as bespoke. And so obviously antibodies are designed in a bespoke way, so that you're not going to replace. But that integration between the antibody or the aptamer and the optical or electrical readout is something where people are working towards more platform type approaches, so that really every time you have a new analyte, you just go get your new antibody, but your sensor platform can work. Those are not very mature yet. And that's an area where, as those evolve and get more mature, it maybe would look more like the semiconductor world, where you just have some design rules and anybody can go, you know, and you can design a new kind of array of sensors and ask cool research questions. But right now, it's just at a point where every time you want to sense something new, you're talking about a 10-year timeline to get from here to there. And I guess I'd love to see it be like circuits, where I have a new idea and I can just get from here to there in a year with some design rules. So that's an area where I think it'd be a lot of fun to see some growth in that platform kind of capability.
It's interesting you mentioned circuits. We're going to come to space because, you know, when chips were first invented, what could you do with them? You know, there was hearing aid, because previously, if you were trying to put a vacuum tube, which people did, there were tiny little vacuum tubes at high voltage and high power, not the best thing to put in your ear. So if you had a transistor, you could do it. And Clayton Christensen once said, you know, the other thing you could do with it is a transistor radio, which is taking all the tunes you want to hear outside of the earshot of your parents, you know. But the other part was space, so chips went into space. And I think, Scarlett, the second part of your question maybe was based on this sort of biosensing and human factors. What does that mean for space?
Well, I can speak to airplanes, that we've been doing a lot of work with sensing, putting sensors on pilots. And since we kind of are starting to learn that human behavior can be a function of their anxiety level, and that the behavior of the pilot could change depending on how stressed they are. And so we've been using sensors to kind of understand that relationship, and putting sensors on, you know, how much are they sweating, or how much is their temperature rising, and done some really interesting work in that. The problem is practically being that a part of the cockpit, there's been a lot of pushback on that, because pilots aren't going to want to wear this stuff every time they get in the cockpit. And so the practical application of it has been stalled. So there's been a lot of work on how do we do this passively. Can we put cameras or other types of sensors in the cockpit that can watch the pilot passively, and then using AI, being able to detect when their anxiety level is going up. And so we have been doing some work in that area. Yeah, that's a good question.
This is good, and we're foreshadowing, you know, some of the topics we didn't get to but are coming up today about AI and data and factories. So I think, Scarlett, I know Deanne's got a question, and there was one that we came up early we didn't get to yet. So Deanne, your question next, please.
So backing up, you talked about the importance of conferences. One of our big challenges in IEEE sensors is industry's reluctance to participate in conferences. So the question is, that I'd ask each of you is, how can IEEE and sensors provide a value judgment or value proposition so that industry wants to come and be part of it?
This is not the easy one, Dan. It's
Yeah,
a good one.
I'm the wrong person to ask because I already agree with you 1,000,000,000%. And I've had the same challenge, you know, be able to, myself, me to be able to go. Now, if I want to present something, that's even a higher barrier because of IP. And so that is something that we do struggle with in the industry, and that's a conversation we continually have to have. And I have to demonstrate that value proposition, you know, to my leadership about why this is important. This is why I want my team here. And they're not just sitting around eating, you know, donuts and drinking coffee. They are engaging and learning new things that then benefit the company overall.
If you had to just pull one thing out, what would you list as a value proposition you'd like to see?
Just what we learn. And it's intangible. We can't put a price tag exactly, but I've seen so many times just what we learn, bring it back. And I learned about fabrics today I never would have thought about. I mean, I have 2 teenage daughters. I can tell me I absolutely know nothing about fabrics and colors and all that. So, but what I just learned today, I didn't expect. And now how can I use that in a new way in my own career in the industry?
Thank you. Ravinder, you've got maybe introduce yourself.
Me?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Stephen Nagel. I am currently at the Rogers RLE laboratory over at MIT. So in between multiple stints at MIT, I was at a variety of different companies, startups, and established ones, and as high as VP level management. And what I noticed to hold back development more than anything else is the multidisciplinary nature of sensors and other kinds of work that I was involved in. And it wasn't so much that the people couldn't understand each other. In many cases, it was a little bit of siloing and fiefdoms and just like, well, no, I know better and all that. So I'm not going to say that's the most pervasive, otherwise we'd never, ever get anything done. But since there's a lot of young folks here who are going to end up in this situation, and they're hopefully going to try to form some of their own companies, I wonder if the three of you could provide some perspectives on how best to tamp down this multidisciplinary problem when it comes to human interaction and meaningfully wanting to contribute what you really know. I think that's where it comes from. I think it all comes from a good place, but I'm sure you've all come upon it, and maybe you can give some advice that's less technical, but nevertheless very valuable for getting things out into the world.
Happy to start. I think that this is a really good point, and I'll give you, from our perspective at AFFOA, we have a kind of 3 or even more kind of core competencies. We're hiring designers from Rhode Island School of Design, textile design. We're hiring electrical engineers and software developers. We're hiring textile engineers, mechanical engineers. And what we do, just to not have any silos, you know, everyone sits together. The co-location is key in my mind. So we have all the scientists and engineers, they all sit in one room, and there's constant collisions between the people, and they're constantly learning from each other. So that today, like, we're creating almost like a new skill set. We have textile technologist positions. These are people that don't have engineering degrees, but they sure know all the pieces now in terms of how you're designing an electronic textile system, from basic electrical engineering, but understanding what they have to consider. They're not going to just come up with a design and say, here you go. They'll understand, hey, we need to consider what kind of wires we're going to need for the power requirements. So they start to understand what questions they have to be asking their colleagues. And the manufacturing people also, there's typically a divide between kind of your, call it, designers and your manufacturers. And that's, if you're in a big company, that's, everyone always complains about that, you know, that I'm getting this design, there's no way I can manufacture this, go back. And we try to just eliminate that, but from the get-go, having the teams work together. So I think co-location of those multiple different disciplines in the same space is really important.
I love that answer. And I started an innovation team in a previous company, and I took these very smart engineers from different disciplines, and I put them in a room all together, and I took down the cue ball so they're all looking at each other. The break room is down the way, and I believe innovation happens not so much it could include the, the technical papers and the research and all that, but I think a lot of innovation happens from informal conversations and just the water cooler talks and just having, talking casually about baseball or whatever, but then that turns into an exchange of ideas between people that discipline-wise wouldn't necessarily work together, but just hanging out socially, and then they start innovating together. And I had phenomenal success and be able to, drive that team to innovate some amazing things and just took down the barriers. I don't care what your title is. I don't care what your discipline is. We're all problem solvers. Let's work together. We would sit around whiteboards, and all of us, anybody had an idea, we would start, churning on it. And so, yeah, I love that answer.
So I think both answers had an element of building trust and connections between the team. But I think that's step one. I think step two is how do you methodically take advantage of that trust and use it to make sure that your team performs well. And I think each company and each organization may have different approaches, but I'll share what I saw at Draper in the very beginning of my career. This was the early days of, MEMS inertial, maybe not the early days, that was probably the 80s, but in the 2000s, there was still a lot of new stuff to be developed. And the MEMS gyro is something that you're using wafer scale processing to make these parts. A lot of these early designs might have been driven by mechanical engineers and material scientists. But at the end of the day, this thing had to wiggle and sense motion, and that sensing had to be an electrical signal. And that device, which is so fragile and scales are the size of human hairs, had to be in a package that could be dropped on the floor. And in order to be successful, the very beginning concept that the mechanical engineer and the material scientist had to be vetted and kind of discussed with the person who was the electrical engineer and the person who was going to put that in a package, and even the person who was going to figure out how that package went into the, iPhone or because, all the way from the top down, you could hire what you call a systems engineer to map out every requirement and interface, but you could also just put everyone in a room on a weekly basis, and each of them share their progress, share their ideas in a way that allowed and invited other people outside of their discipline to ask dumb questions, and with the trust that we're talking about, no question's a dumb question, and the expectation of that group is that they teach each other their disciplines at a level that's deep enough that allows that co-design to happen from the beginning, so we don't make a stupid mistake and put something that is going to melt in a hot place, or stuff like that actually really does happen in real life. You get halfway through this design and realize that it's not going to work out because of some other thing that's presented by somebody who wasn't at the table when you were beginning that process. So we invited all the stakeholders on the kind of technical side to the table to participate in design reviews and discussions, and we required people to explain their work to people who might have a science background but were truly outside of their field, and they had to learn how to communicate, and it was all built on trust, because you can't do that if you're afraid of asking a dumb question or being judged for not understanding it very quickly.
Yes. All sensors, just like any technology, sensors are also, they are full of errors, calibration issues. The applications we have been discussing so far, by and large, require real-time operations. So what are the kind of strategies you would anticipate in each areas in your own domain if sensor fails?
Well, in aerospace, it's redundancy, and airplanes have three, common to have three strings of the navigation system, IMU, or three paths to the flight controls, and they are always checking each other, and with a voting process. So we design. Unfortunately, we've learned the hard way that we have to put these designs into account that and assume that at least one of these or two of these are going to fail, and that cannot end the mission, that cannot end the flight in a catastrophic way. And so that's how we do it in aerospace.
I mean, I was going to say the same exact thing, redundancy. It's, if you have an electronic sensing component that's critical for the mission, you have to ask the question, okay, what do you do if it's going to fail? So the example I was going to provide is, in the Army, there's unfortunately, fratricide happens when you accidentally kill friendly forces. And the technologies to identify friendly forces on the battlefield hasn't really evolved. I mean, the military has maybe a little retroreflector over here on the side. What if I don't see that retroreflector? So whenever we're introducing a new technology that can identify, let's say, a friendly force, you have to make sure that, okay, what if it's not working? Is there a backup to it? So really thinking through the backup and making sure that there's not just one point of failure for that device, but that there's redundancy built in if it does fail.
Yeah, can I jump in? Because of the automotive world, and we were talking earlier about inertial sensors, and one thing that came up, and also about systems. So there's a theme here about, the sensor is itself a component, and it might also be a system. What does it do? But I think the other theme is the sensor, is part of a larger system. So it's a systems and a sensor. And the one example that we had from the gyroscope world, which senses angular rotation. So, if your car's in a skid, you want to detect that your steering wheel's going one way, but the car's going the other way. But the safety requirement is that the sensor can't give you the wrong direction of the spin. So it can be off by a certain amount, or it can give no answer, right? Then the system could say, I'm not getting any data. But if it gives you the wrong answer, which tells you that you're spinning, clockwise when you're really going counterclockwise, that's now going to cause a problem. So redundancy, is one possible solution, but you run into this difficulty, which is, if you've built the same component, even if you have two of them, potentially they're going to fail in the same way. So you're going to get 2 wrong answers or 3 wrong answers. It's still going to be not supporting your safety requirement. So in those cases, maybe it's still redundancy, but you need 2 different types of technologies, so that if one technology fails, or doesn't give you the right answer when that's a requirement that you get the right answer, you've got a different supporting mechanism, whether that's 2 technical things, or whether it's people, human, the loop, the human and the people. It looks like there's more to say, so I wanted to add to that, not only about the past, right, but what are we thinking about the future? What are we seeing from what we're learning about this interaction of sensors, systems, real time? What's some of the desirable futures that we want to see brought into being with this community? So feel free to answer the first part, but I want to
I'll
shift
jump in on the first part.
towards the future.
I thought of another idea is like IMUs, we purposely, they may be all the same make, but we purposely orient them differently inside the ship, so that if they all have the same problem and the same axis, then just because that they're oriented differently, we can tell that, we got a mismatch here. And I'll step back and for the second one.
Yeah, so the question, I think, with all of this, we're thinking sort of what's been successful in the past, and you've heard some of the transformative change, and also some of the stories in the industry that went from, what could be done from a scientific principle, but also how is that really enabling, new kinds of actions. So we've got some of that conversation already in the room. We've got this intersection between sensors and what does it mean for a greater system, whether it's a human system or a manufacturing capability. We talked a lot about the people that are in the room and how do they work together. So in the time that we've got here, I was thinking it could be helpful for us to also think about, so where's this going? What's the envisioned future that we'd like to see come about next? Amy, did you want to add something to this? Looked like you had a thought, if you're ready.
I was actually just resonating with what you guys have been saying. I do like the orthogonal sensing types as an element of safety, and I've seen that in a lot of systems. It's really effective. Human in the loop is also an element. But in the future, I'm gonna let somebody else take that one.
We're also in the sensors everywhere panel, right? So we're living in this world where, it's not just single sensors anymore, but, there was one time they said it was going to be trillion, the Internet of Things would be 1 trillion sensors. I don't know exactly how people are keeping count, but the sense is that we're at that point and it's not stopping. Ravinder.
Yeah, before we move to future aspect, I just want to go back. A human in the loop is an important thing, but the over-reliance on sensor means humans tend to assume that the technology will take care. You gave some examples. So that also, in a sense, is counterproductive. What do we do in such a scenario? And that could be part of the kind of, what can be done in the future, because there are examples where these things fail. If you look at health is pretty much a serious thing. If cortisol sensor gives you a data which is, human relies heavily on the data, but that could be wrong.
Yeah, I know you're going to be talking about AI later, but one of the things that comes to mind as you talk about this is I recently heard about a study about doctors doing diagnostics, and if you teamed them with AI versus AI alone versus them alone, and the teamed with AI group did the worst because they assumed the AI was right. The AI alone group actually did quite well in this particular study. So I think it is an important thing, and I feel like you guys, your company, have looked very deeply at that issue.
That's a great point, Amy. Like in airplanes, what we've learned that the more automation that we've added in the cockpit, trying to reduce the workload of the pilot, in those instances, yes, the pilots are less busy. The automation is taking care of some trivial things that the pilot no longer has to think about. But it introduces a whole new set of dynamics we didn't anticipate, and the interchange between the human now and the system. And I think to answer your question, I think we have a tendency to innovate in a vacuum. I'm going to develop this system and it's going to be awesome. And then the humans, we train them over here. And it's not until we actually are in the world that we first time put the two together. And I think the concept, what we're learning is that the human behavior, the human psychology needs to be part of the design process and more closely coupled so we can better understand the dynamics between the human and the technology, and why are they perceiving things this way, and why do they react that way when they perceive it from this technology. So I think that's, I'd like to see more of that in the future.
The other thing I'd like to see, again, you can tell I'm kind of recently obsessed with diagnostics, but a lot of physicians are trained to look at patterns, not just some individual level. So it'll be, the pattern of this protein over time, or it'll be the pattern of if this goes up, this should go down, and if they're not following this pattern, there's something wrong. And that insight is usually guided by a deeper understanding of physiology. But today, as we're going more and more towards the use of machine learning to combine different sensor outputs and recognize patterns that are trained on truth data, like, yes, this person is going blind and this is what happened in the sensors. Sometimes the complaint that we have is that we don't really have a mechanistic understanding. It's kind of a black box. And I guess what I'd like to see development in the future around is better ways of untangling that black box. So the power of machine learning is huge. The ability to train a mathematical model to be able to recognize patterns is, beyond what we can do. But at the same time, without a mechanistic, deeper insight, our interaction is going to be limited to trust it blindly or not. And so I would like to see more science around not just the evolution of AI to recognize these powerful patterns and make them more and more true, but some work around, and I know there is work, but just more work around, don't let this be a black box so that I know how to interact with it.
This is good. We're almost done because of time, but I really like how you express that as what you'd like to see, right? The desired future. I wanted to share one story. Sarah Seeker was interested when she heard about the sensors in Spotlight, but her son is graduating today, so she's not here, but she said, oh, sensors. Well, this is what I need. She's running a mission to explore the clouds of Venus to potentially discover life on Venus, but what she needs are sensors, the individual sensors, but also that can be deployed as a system. And she said, well, I really want to, engage with the sensors community. So that's one that I wanted to share. Maybe if we could just, the dinner party download style. So like, what's one cool thing that's surprising, either that's in your mind from this conversation or that you've seen that you want to have come forward? You gave us one about AI, and Sasha, I'll give you the last word too, since you had the first word. Sasha, what would you like to see?
Well, we've talked a lot about some of the challenges and opportunities with electronics and textiles and sensing, and I think for me it's envisioning a future where they really come together in a way that, for example, in the medical field, you could truly, wear something like a t-shirt that really feels as comfortable as a t-shirt, where there's no user friction anymore if it's a pilot or anyone or a patient that needs to wear this for the whole day, and it's really giving you real data that helps people's lives. We don't have anything like that today. We have things we bolt on. We have that there's just it's never going to take off like that. So
Not just
I envision
wearables, but what you're wearing.
we're not even gonna, exactly what we're really wearing. We're not going to be calling it wearables. It's a T-shirt, and that T-shirt actually will provide the data that will give your physician real actionable information about your state of your health.
Excellent. Steve, what do you envision?
So you talk about that opportunity to go to Venus. I'll give you some data from the industry. What we are looking for is how are we going to go to Venus at lower cost? How are we going to sense where we are or sense these things? And as we had a conversation, Bruce, earlier this morning, that nation states are kind of backing away from funding the space industry, and it's now private industry that are much more cost sensitive. And so as you think about, designing sensors, we need high accuracy, high capability, but also lower cost. Oh, and by the way, they need to be radiation proof. So, there's some enormous challenges here that we as an industry are, faced with. How do we solve these things? And I think that's the opportunity now.
Yeah, we were discussing, there's a recent book, one of your colleagues and also Matt Wurzel at the Harvard Business School, part of the space community in Boston, described you can apply Le Chatelier's principle, sort of the chemistry of how, situations go back to equilibrium. When it's disequilibrium, you can get a system to move in the direction you want. And so the business school teams have sort of appropriated this and said, you can, create demand and supply. The two things are interrelated. So, okay, so Ava, you had the first word. We'll give you also the last word, and then I think it'll be time for lunch. So what would you like to leave the audience with as we go out into the lunch crowd?
So I would like to kind of summarize something I think we've been circling, and that's the bi-directional relationship between sensing and discovery. So if you know what you want to sense, say glucose, that drives innovation and invention. And there's a rush to invent those devices and those sensors. And that's the demand side. But on the platform side, if you build it, they will come. The sensor community has also succeeded here in building things that people didn't know how they were going to use that changed the game as people began to explore. I'm not sure this is quite a game changer, but heart rate monitors started out as a niche thing for elite athletes in the 80s. But heart failure is still the #1 leading cause of death in the US. And today, those wearable monitors are saving lives because we can tell if you have an irregular heart rate and preemptively address, possible future issues. So I think sensors have this kind of love-hate, circle of, I need to know what I'm sensing so I can invent the best sensor, but sometimes we do build the thing first and discover later how it's going to be a game changer. And I think that it's worth embracing in your career, both sides of that coin, and maybe just try to sit on both sides of that coin. Go learn the need, go learn the area that you're most interested in terms of the demand, and in parallel, go nurture your bottoms-up passions I think both have to be embraced, and that is what we circle in all these conversations.
Thank you. If we can all thank Amy, Sasha, and Steve for our inspiration.